Before I read and preach on this gospel lesson, I need to provide some background to it first. This is in John chapter 11. This is what happened immediately after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. So the Mary that's mentioned in the first verse of that which I will read is not Mary, the mother of Jesus. It is Mary, one of the sisters of Lazarus. Lazarus had died. He was put into a tomb, wrapped in the burial linen clothes, put in a tomb. Then Jesus comes to see Mary and Martha, the sister. And after he has a conversation with Martha, then he heads out to the tomb. When he goes to the tomb where Lazarus is buried, and Mary and Martha accompany him, show him where the tomb is, and quite a few other Jewish people went there with them. These Jewish people had come out of the city of Jerusalem to basically console Mary and Martha upon the death of their brother. So the raising of Lazarus from death to life, bringing him out of the tomb, was something that was witnessed not just by the two sisters, but by a group of other Jewish people. So this is what happens after Jesus resurrects the life of Lazarus. The Holy Gospel, according to John, the 11th chapter. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in Jesus. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered the council, and they said, "What are we to do? For this man, Jesus, performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put Jesus to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where Jesus was, he should let them know so that they might arrest Jesus. The Gospel of the Lord. This story I would label as no good deed goes unpunished. No good deed goes unpunished. So Jesus is persecuted for many things, including raising someone to life. No good deed goes unpunished. So the story here takes place a couple of miles east of Jerusalem, and it takes place very, very close to the end of the ministry of Jesus. Very close to the end of the ministry of Jesus. So it said that there were Jews that gathered with the sisters who saw Jesus raise Lazarus from death to life when Jesus said to Lazarus while he was in the tomb dead, "Lazarus, come out." He came out, he was bound with linen cloths, burial cloths, and Jesus had them unbind him. And so now Lazarus lives. So there apparently were quite a few Jewish people who saw this resurrection of Lazarus. And it said many believed in him. Well, I guess they did. And it doesn't specify what they believed or how they believed. Did they believe Jesus was Son of God because he'd raised Lazarus to life? Probably they did. At this point, those who witnessed this miraculous event should have been thinking that Jesus is more than just a good prophet. Some of the people who saw this, some of the Jews who saw this, they went and told the Pharisees what Jesus had done. Now that does not necessarily mean that those Jews were going to the Pharisees and relaying this information so the Pharisees could get rid of Jesus. Does not mean that. What they may have done was simply report the facts of this incredible story of this event that Jesus performed. They may have been just doing that and wanted the Pharisees to know. The Pharisees, along with Sadducees, the scribes, the chief priests, they were really the leaders of the religion of Judaism, which made them the leaders of the nation of Israel, and they should be apprised of events like this. So it may be that the Jews that went and told the Pharisees what Jesus had done were not trying to get Jesus in trouble. They were merely relaying a miracle to the religious leaders of that time. In any event, the chief priest and the Pharisees now gathered a council together based upon what they heard. This council may have been what's known as the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a nationwide council of the religious leaders of the Jewish people at that time. It was a governing body. It was also a body that would rule on the propriety of rules and regulations, of laws, of customs and traditions. Some people talk about the Sanhedrin as being akin to the United States Supreme Court. But the Sanhedrin was more than just a judicial body. As a matter of fact, the Sanhedrin would probably be more comparable to the combination of the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. presidency. Because they would, in effect, have rules and traditions come into being and rule on those as well. So they combine the legislative, executive, and judicial events or elements all together. In any event, what you had was the chief priest, who were the leading priest, and the Pharisees. They gathered a council, and they said, what are we going to do now? For this man, meaning Jesus, performs many signs. Now, in the Gospel of John, John uses the word sign for a miracle. So when John says signs, it means, for this man performs many miracles. They go on to say, if we let him, Jesus, go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a wonderful idea. Therefore, let Jesus go on like this so many will believe in him. I suspect what they meant by the word believe was that many people will follow Jesus. Not believe he's the Son of God, but will follow him. Okay? I think there's a difference in there. And so they said, if we let him go like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. The Romans being the Roman Empire, which had subjected the Israelites under their rule. And that had been the case for about 100 years by this time. So they said that they're going to come and take away both our place and our nation. When they said both our place, by place they might have meant the city of Jerusalem, and they may have meant the temple. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, he said to them, you know nothing at all. So here are a few words about Caiaphas. Caiaphas had been the high priest from about the year AD 18. Now this was AD 30, probably AD 30. Caiaphas was the high priest from AD 18 until AD 37, which meant this event took place about 2/3 of the way through his tenure as high priest. If you go to the crucifixion story of Jesus, there's a scene in which the Jewish leaders take Jesus to a high priest named Annas. Now, Annas had been the high priest prior to that, but he was not the high priest then. But still, people deferred to him, and he was actually Caiaphas' father-in-law. But Annas was the high priest from around AD 7 to around AD 14 when he was deposed, kicked out of his spot by the Roman Empire. The Jewish people felt that once a high priest, always a high priest, because it really was an appointment intended for life. So people still deferred to Annas. Now this was Caiaphas though. And Caiaphas is the one who was officially the high priest. He was the one who would have to give the final approval to actions and steps that the council would take. So now Caiaphas is speaking, okay? And he said, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man," meaning Jesus, "should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." This conclusively proves that Jesus was killed not for religious reasons, but rather for political reasons and economic reasons. I want to repeat, Jesus was not killed for religious reasons, that he claimed to be the Son of God. Instead, Jesus was killed for political reasons and economic reasons. This statement by Caiaphas bears that out. The religious leaders had a good life back then. They had a lot of authority and power and prestige. They had probably a good amount of money. They were probably well off. They knew that if Jesus continued on what he was doing, he would become more and more popular. And they feared that he would end up leading a rebellion and that the people would want to fight the Roman Empire to try to gain their independence back. And everybody knew that if anybody took on the Roman Empire, they would be crushed. They would not survive that. The might of the Roman Empire would eliminate many of the Jewish people and traditions and their cities and everything like that. So Caiaphas is saying it's better for one man to die than to end up leading a rebellion that gets the nation destroyed. So John the Apostle writes that Caiaphas did not say this of his own accord, but being the high priest that year, Caiaphas prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And then John goes on to write, "And not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad." That's likely John's prophecy rather than Caiaphas's, because this last part, that Jesus would die not for the nation of Israel only, but for all people to be gathered together into God, that John was talking about, the sacrifice of Jesus would be for all people for all time, for their salvation. And so John was saying the death of Jesus was not going to be to fulfill a political need or an economic need, but to fulfill the need for the salvation of mankind through the grace of Jesus Christ. So John goes on to write, "So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death." The Jewish leaders made plans to put Jesus to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with his disciples. So if you look at a map of that time, and you find Jerusalem, if you go north 13, 14, 15 miles, you come to Ephraim. Ephraim was also northwest of Jericho, just for about 12 or 13 miles, just for reference purposes. And that put Ephraim in the area called the Judean wilderness, which was likely a place where John the Baptist used to be. So this goes on to say that now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many of the Jews went up from the country, that is, from the other towns and villages, to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. So they were there in Jerusalem, and they're looking for Jesus. And they're saying to one another, as they stood in the temple area, "What do you think? Do you think he will not come to the feast at all?" So this indicates that the average Jew at that time knew that Jesus was being pursued by the Pharisees and the Sadducees and other religious leaders were out to get Jesus. So they're wondering if Jesus is going to show up at all. In the meantime, the chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anybody knows where Jesus is, they need to tell where he is, tell somebody on the council so they can go and arrest Jesus. So the Pharisees wanted to go and arrest Jesus quietly, in private. So at most, there might be Jesus and some of his disciples. Jesus did show up at the Passover. He came in on Palm Sunday, and he stayed in the temple area all day, each day that week. So he was not running from anybody. He was not hiding. He was just going to make sure that he was going to be sacrificed, murdered, executed at the Passover on a cross, and not earlier in some village or someplace in the wilderness or in a Roman prison. God's will and his timing always prevails. In the name of God, amen.